Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Riley is Obsessed with a Game that came out years ago and only just now got himself together enough to talk about it. And today, we're going to discuss Velvet Crowe, the main protagonist of Tales of Berseria and the first Lord of Calamity. Velvet is a smart, strong young woman, for whom family is the most important thing. As you get to know her during the opening chapter, you learn a lot about her. Her skills in combat, which she learned for the sake of hunting, her excellent cooking skills, her lack of social skills, her lack of future prospects. That's a loaded statement you got there, Riley. I know. Look, Velvet is a lovely, well-rounded character, but she isn't complicated. She's holistic, but not complex. That's not a bad thing. Her life revolves around her little family bubble. It's all she really cares about. A lot of folks will tell you that such a simply motivated character is a bad one, but it doesn't have to be. She isn't a bad character because it's made clear that there are consequences to her single-mindedness. Others in her village are moving on with their lives, progressing. Her little brother is planning for the future. Her only friend is trying to woo a cute doctor from the next village over. Velvet, though, she clearly has no plans for what's going to happen if Laphicet grows up and leaves. She doesn't have any interests in men or women romantically. She doesn't have hobbies outside of housework, and she doesn't have skills outside of basic hunting and family care. She'd be an excellent stay-at-home mom, but she doesn't care to find anyone to do that with. I'm not claiming that anyone needs to be a stay-at-home anything, but that's the only skill set she has, and she doesn't have any interest in developing anything else. Her whole world is wrapped up in this little family bubble of hers, with her sickly little brother Laphicet as its linchpin. So, spoiler alert for the first hour of gameplay, Laphicet is killed by Artorias, her brother-in-law and respected mentor. So, in a single moment, the person she cares about most in the world is killed by the person she respects most in the world, while in the background the village that contains her entire world is being consumed by what they, at the time, called Demon Blight. It took less than 30 seconds for her entire world to be completely destroyed, in an act of betrayal no less. As the betrayal is happening, Artorias claims it to be a sacrifice to the world. An act performed for the sake of protecting the world at large, one small loss for the good of everyone. But Velvet doesn't know the world, and even if she did, she wouldn't care about it. Velvet knows Laphicet. Velvet knows her village. Velvet thought she knew Artorias. That's it. That's her everything. That's all she's got, and all of it is gone. And so, Velvet becomes filled with hatred and despair, both of which are aspects of malevolence. The malevolence consumes her and becomes so powerful that it manifests in a new arm where Artorias chopped her old one off. She becomes a demon, a Therian specifically, a demon that consumes the malevolence of other demons to grow stronger. Filled with hatred and despair, she begins to greedily consume all the demons that are tangentially between her and Artorias. It's only after she's consumed every one of them that Artorias bids her look around, and she realizes that those demons she was consuming were the villagers, including her best friend. She is no longer an innocent big sister. She can no longer claim that she has never hurt anyone now. In her throes of passion, she killed everyone that she knew. She is a demon, a monster, a Therian. And so she attempts to consume Artorias, who handedly subdues her. He throws out a line that doesn't make sense in this context, but does in the context of the emotional state he's in at that moment.
I, Artorias Colbrand, will end your pain.
And then throws her into a specially made prison cell, where he feeds her demons every day for 3 years. Everything I say after this point is going to be a spoiler. If you'd like to skip to my final thoughts on everything, here's the timestamp. In the meantime, let's get to the meat of Velvet's philosophy throughout the story. What does one say to justify the death of thousands? I think back to all the writing courses and advice I've received over the years. Villains who kill because they've gone mad are boring. Villains who kill out of emotional instability are boring. You need to justify their actions in some way, or they aren't compelling. A villain needs an interesting philosophy, or they're just an obstacle to overcome, not a story element. That's all fair enough advice. I do agree that villains with interesting philosophies are wonderful, and the feeling of understanding why they do what they do, and on some level agreeing with them, is almost euphoric. The Tales games have done a wonderful job of it in the past. Van from Tales of the Abyss comes to mind. But if anything, Velvet is an example of a villain who has none of these things. She doesn't have some core philosophy she works from, or some grand and noble aspiration to save the world. Velvet is a monster who embraces her nature as a monster. Does she save the world? Yes. Does she intend to? No. She does not give a lick about saving the world. She never cared about the world at all, and the fact that her action saved it doesn't matter to her one bit. Lines like this,
"Why did you kill him? His blood on your hands! Answer me! Answer me! Why?"
good or the optimal play. All she wants is revenge. She doesn't even take comfort in the fact that she saved the world once she's done it. She doesn't even acknowledge that she saved the world. That shit's for Eleanor and, debatably, Eisen to worry about. Let them be the protagonists. Velvet is just here for revenge. So, what does that make this story? A glorified revenge flick? Is this John Wick, but with demon powers? Well, yeah, kinda. And if the idea of a female John Wick with demon powers, less of a conscience, and optional outfits is enough to entice you, then let me welcome you to the party. Now, real quick, let's take a look at a list of things that Velvet does over the story that a hero does not do. 1. Outright murders 2 orphans who love each other in front of each other, mirroring the same tragedy that occurred to her and causing another character to feel the same grief that she does, potentially starting the cycle anew, if not for the fact that she successfully murders her too immediately after. Bitch slaps 4 gods awake because it's the most efficient route to get what she wants. Blows up the warehouse of a small mining town, destroying the local economy and starting a fire that kills several. Murders hundreds of people who dedicated their lives to the defense of the innocent. Forces an entire city to evacuate into a frozen tundra on threat of death to lure a target to a position they can fortify. Releases hundreds of prisoners, some innocent, most not, knowing they'll be slaughtered in a bloodbath because it's a convenient distraction. Topples the leading religion of the world, which is admittedly a good thing in the end, but still leaves the population almost defenseless and unable to protect themselves from or even see the demons that populate the earth, thus creating a literal dark age wherein thousands of years of history is lost to turmoil until things can finally get more or less settled again. And honestly, that's not everything. That's just what comes to mind right now, and potentially shows you a dark and somewhat disconcerting look into my order of priority. Anyway, Velvet is a monstrous creature who, on some level, feels guilt for some of her actions. The scene where she murders the brother and sister is heartbreaking for a number of reasons, but is too consumed by hatred and despair to stop what she's doing until Artorias is dead. Actually, this whole time, we've basically been talking about her hatred, but we haven't talked about her despair. Which is a shame, as her despair is the far more interesting note of the two, so let's take a good look at that. Now, God, I hope I don't have to explain what despair is to my audience. I trust that you all are at least that intelligent, but let's take a quick look anyway, as despair is something not usually mentioned in a list of sinful emotions or traits. Despair is the feeling that there is, more or less, no hope. A burning feeling similar to terror that, unlike hatred, weakens the person who experiences it both physically and in terms of willpower. When one is racked with despair, they fall to their knees and give up, truly believing that there is nothing that can ever be done to fix what's happened, to achieve their desire, or earn them forgiveness for their sins. Velvet is consumed by despair in the moment that Laphicet is lost to her, but that despair flashes through her for only a moment before the hatred takes its place, filling her with the desire to seek vengeance. It's hatred that motivates her through her entire story, as despair is not a motivator. All other forms of malevolence motivate one to action, but despair takes one's action away. In the moments that despair consumes her, such as when she meets a Nominat or when she kills the brother and sister, Velvet almost ends her quest. She gives up right then and there. It's only the motivation of Fee that allows her to keep going and overcome her despair. Shout out to my boy Eisen, who literally shouts at Fee, "Will you just tell this idiot what she needs to hear?" As Velvet is in the process of being consumed by a Nominat, and they're all next. Despair is, perhaps, the true antagonist of this story, and it's only in overcoming it that Velvet can achieve her goals. Now, unfortunately, that is the end of my dive into the mind of Velvet Crowe. As I said at the beginning, she's not a complex character. What matters is not the complexity of her machinations, but the sheer, world-ending, God-killing power of her love turned hatred. Is Velvet someone to look up to? No, not in any way. There are a million ways she could have been better. She could have been more worldly, spent more time planning her own future, learning to care about those around her who aren't in her little family circle. Any one of those things might have prevented her from walking the path of destruction, agony, and death that she did. Velvet is perhaps one of the truest anti-heroes to grace gaming literature in quite some time. She's flawed, broken, twisted, and monstrous, and we love her anyway. We relate to her. On some level, we all, even the best of us, know what it's like for someone else to make the decision to take from us what we love and give it to another, claiming that it's the right thing to do, the logical solution. But we aren't fully logical creatures. We're people. Sometimes we're selfish. Sometimes we're greedy. We are all beautifully, perfectly flawed. And we'll talk about that in our next video, dissecting the philosophy of Artorias and the Exorcist's Abbey. I love you nerds, and I hope you have a lovely day.